Thank you very much. Good afternoon, President Teri and Dean Björkman and ladies and gentlemen. I have to make a confession. I've never given an installation speech before, so I'm a bit nervous. Also, I'm not used to reading from the paper, but I decided to write it for myself. In any case, I was thinking what I would talk about, and I was looking at the web, the instructions, and supposedly I'm supposed to summarize my life's work in a way that's understandable for the normal popular audience. But I haven't done my life's work yet, so instead I'm talking about the research I'm doing at the moment. This is based on two papers we have currently revising for journals. We've been studying this phenomenon called hybrid organizations. And the topic, because I'm a professor in strategy, I'm focusing on how companies can create value at the intersections between different domains of society, between different bodies of knowledge and ways of reasoning, different cultures. And our focus is really on how managers think in a certain specific sector and how you can combine different ways of thinking across the sectors. These different ways of understanding things or solving problems have been called industry cultures, cognitive schemes, institutional logics, sometimes also ideologies. I use the term system of reasoning, which comes from moral philosophy and also philosophy of mind and language. And one example today, we had talk about agency theory, which we can see as a system of reasoning, a way of justifying decisions, evaluating things, which then stands in contrast to some other systems of reasoning, for example, kind of social justice, worth, and so forth, which would lead different conclusions concerning salaries and payment and so on. But I'm not interested so much in the type of systems of reasoning we teach in universities, but more those that have evolved in the fields. And we, of course, most of us are academics. In the academia, we have different evaluation criteria, different norms, different ideals that we follow, and practices that relate to those ideals. So, for example, peer review is a practice that's somehow justified and inspired by the ideals and norms of our field. The key task of managers is to think. So managers use available information, knowledge, expertise to choose what to attend to, what decisions they make, what activities they take. It can concern how to motivate the employees or how to compete against other companies and so forth. I've been interested in this kind of context-dependent traditional ways to think. If you think of hospitals, there's been huge changes when you try to bring the managerial thinking into a hospital, because the medical profession has their own norms, which is to put the patient first, and that leads to certain practices. And it's always troubling to combine different types of concerns, because you have competing norms, competing evaluation criteria. Hybrid organizations are organizations that try to combine traditional ways of thinking and break the boundaries, break the established ways to think. This is probably the most famous hybrid organization is in the microfinance. The person here is Muhammad Yunus, who got the Nobel Peace Prize for founding the Grameen Bank, which pioneered the microfinance. And it has been quite an innovative, actually, quite a sophisticated organizational innovation. One might think that it's an easy task to start lending money to poor people in small sums. But there's a lot of innovation involved in that. And it has also been difficult to implement. If you think of the developmental aid, the idea of taking ideas from finance and actually trying to create interest income from the poor people was almost unacceptable. Also, for the finance perspective, lending money and not being sure that you can make a profit out of it is also quite unacceptable. The relationship to the customers or beneficiaries is very different. In finance, you think, can I get the money back? And in developmental aid, you consider how much in need are these people? How much a difference I can make? How can we improve their lives? A particularly interesting problem for microfinance organizations is how to collect the debts back. Because if you collect the debt back, you can really put the person in the worst position they were potentially. If it's an entrepreneur and you insist on getting the money back, at the critical stage you can bankrupt their enterprise. But if you don't actually collect the debt, then what happens is that basically nobody will be paying anymore. Because the neighbors will also see they are not paying the debts back, I'm not going to do that. And you bankrupt the whole system. So operating in this kind of hybrid areas requires a lot of innovation. And we have already my colleagues, I mean, the field of management has documented some of the innovations that have happened in these areas. And I think importantly we can abstract from those and learn things that can help in other hybrid domains. I've been doing work with my colleague Markus Bergman from Imperial College London, and we've been looking at the changes that have happened in the pharmaceuticals industry, where there's been a big technological change from chemicals-based pharmaceuticals, where you basically take a lot of different chemical compounds and with some information, some insight, try to screen which of those are helpful against certain diseases. Now the microbiology has led to an increasing generation of knowledge, fundamental knowledge about the human body and how it works. So here we have Plasmodium, what's the name of the parasite? Plasmodium, yes. Plasmodium, which is the parasite that causes malaria, and here is of course the mosquito that spreads the parasite. So the parasite has loads of different proteins that it uses to function. And if you can map out these proteins, here is a picture of one study done in this, they published it at the University of Toronto. If you can map out what the proteins are and how they function, you may be able to develop and design drugs that aim to neutralize or disable a specific protein, in which case you will have more effective medicine and also less side effects. But this is a huge problem for the pharmaceutical companies, a traditional managerial way of thinking. Because the pharmaceutical companies work by generating knowledge and protecting it with patents or secrecy. But here you're moving from chemicals to biology. The amount of knowledge that you require is increasing hugely. And it's prohibitively costly to generate that knowledge. On the other hand, they have private knowledge about what the proteins are that would be important to study. So the question is, how can they move from their own corporate model of protecting intellectual property towards the academic system of thinking, where you are producing public knowledge for public use? And we studied this organization called Structural Genomics Consortium. It's a small company. It's founded by some senior people from GlaxoSmithKline and Wellcome Trust. Actually, it's not a company. It's a charity or charitable organization. It's also a public-private partnership. And this is an organization that attempted to innovate new ways to coordinate the channeling of resources, the research agenda in the universities, and how kind of company money and public money could be combined in a way that would improve the generation of relevant knowledge for improving human life. And we have here the universities that are participating: Oxford, really beautiful campus, University of Toronto, and then Karolinska Institutet from Sweden. The initial company was GlaxoSmithKline, now they have Merck and some other companies as well. Wellcome Trust is the biggest charity in the world, at least medical charity. They have 15 billion pounds of endowment, and there are some nations involved as well, such as Canada and the state of Ontario. And the idea here is to prevent the duplication of effort. Previously, you could have different companies studying the same stuff, the same proteins, and keeping them secret. But now instead of every company doing the same stuff, they are trying to pool money and combine the agenda setting by the companies with the work of the academics. And although academics and corporations have been collaborating throughout history, it's very cumbersome typically because the companies need to find academics who have career interests that align with the interests of the corporation. And there's also a huge free rider problem because if one pharmaceuticals company pays for some research to be done and it's publicly available, then all the other companies can benefit from it. The entrepreneurs were very skillful and they devised this practice where the companies nominate lists of things they want to be studied, and the academics whose logic is to basically improve their own career prospects, deepen their understanding of certain things they have already studied. The academics were free to choose what they study, as long as it's on the list submitted by these companies. So by creating this intermediary organization between the companies and the universities, you could accommodate both the interests of the corporate way of thinking and the academic way of thinking. Ontario was very keen on putting some money on the table because they wanted to have the headquarters located in Toronto. So the government system of reasoning is how can we improve the human resources in our domain? And they are paying something like, we estimate 5 million euros a year. But in exchange, they have a research unit with 80 researchers in Toronto. There's been many startups related to that. And some of the large companies like Pfizer have also relocated some of the protein-related research to Toronto. So it's been a good deal all over. But the key task, and we have many different findings that I won't have time to go through, of course, here, is that the entrepreneurs have been able to see what's the way these different actors think. How can we devise a hybrid organization in between that accommodates the interest and the practices of these different parties? They do many things. For example, they have a visiting scholar program so that they sponsor different academics to come to these research centers and give talks and stay there and collaborate with the researchers. So it's really combining academic and corporate ideals and goals. So it's quite instructive to compare these hybrid approaches between the Microfinance organization and the Structural Genomic Consortium. In both cases, the hybridization of these different ways of thinking have been accomplished through a new organization. Rather than the universities accepting money from the companies and redirecting their research efforts, which would have been probably disastrous for the reputation of the universities, or the companies trying to hire academics who would then be allowed to publish freely and do what they want, which also wouldn't have worked because the academics wouldn't have wanted to work for a big pharmaceuticals company. It would not have been legitimate employment relationship for them. In the case of microfinance, the most successful organizations have been new. So developmental aid agencies have not done well trying to move into finance. And companies from finance have not been doing well moving into this kind of aid microfinance thing. There's some initial research that suggests that even in microfinance, those companies who predominantly recruit people from finance background or from developmental aid background are not doing too well. The most successful companies are those who recruit university students who are not yet socialized and deeply ingrained in these different ways of thinking, but who you can rather teach this kind of hybrid norms, hybrid evaluation criteria that you need at the intersections of these established cultures, industry cultures or bodies of knowledge. Then I think we can, I don't know if you saw it coming, but we can also then kind of discuss things that are closer to home. My colleague Markus has also looked at the commercialization of universities, and in many ways Aalto is a hybrid organization. There are many many strands of traditional systems of reasoning or ideologies for universities. You have the Humboldtian old view of university as a place that creates knowledge for its own sake. You have the industrial idea of a university as an engine of economic growth by providing skilled workforce. And then you have a more recent kind of US-based kind of the spin-off licensing type of technology transfer ideology where universities create knowledge, they protect it through patents, and then they license it out, which is very compatible still with this academic ideal. Aalto is experimenting with different ways. Of course, the thing that we combine School of Business with engineering, we have arts, we have science, creates these kind of intersections between established norms and ideals. I've heard some issues, for example, when you have management scholars in School of Science and people are discussing dissertations because the evaluation criteria are very different. You can't use your typical reasoning, typical knowledge, body of expertise to think about these things that are foreign to you. Yes. Microfinance shows that it's worthwhile to try and combine these previously separate domains. Microfinance has created a lot of good. Also, there's of course negative issues. There's been talk whether it has very serious disadvantages, but it has a lot of promise. And Aalto can greatly benefit from hybridization, trying to find different ways to combine the academic ways of thinking with the corporate concerns and also societal concerns. Hybrid organizations are defined by their willingness to deviate from these established systems, established ways of thinking, and the experimentation with mixture of different bodies of knowledge. The greatest challenge for this hybridization will be to negotiate the guiding norms. The microfinance was originally driven by norms of aid, poverty alleviation, and development, but subsequent for-profit firms that have combined these desires with financial aim of financial returns have led to all kinds of conflicts. I think the licensing model of universities is a good example that after a period of experimentation, you can reach a solution that's acceptable to everyone, like the technology transfer offices in the US. But if the real value, if Aalto wants to create real value, we should have willingness to innovate with different combinations. Almost everything we do is somehow normative. I mean, there's norms that guide what is good in our job, what is a worthwhile, acceptable outcome. And for us, in the academia, it's often been the creation of publicly available knowledge that's free for everyone. And so these things need to be negotiated. Our research with Markus, the ongoing research, suggests that when Aalto tries to experiment with different ways, it should try to separate them from the existing organization. It's very difficult to take the existing professors and try to combine their ways of thinking with something that they find foreign. It's far better often to have distinct units or even different organizations that try out these hybrid experiments. We have, of course, done that traditionally. One example is the MBA program, which has combined the ideals of education in Finland, which have not always been comparable with selling education, to this kind of a business idea of serving a market, providing what the market values, which is the MBA education for people who are willing to pay. And that has always been organized as a different cooperation. I think this Aalto University Design Factory, Venture Garage, all these things have a lot of promise. And then we need to see how we can bring elements from the academic tradition and way of thinking together in these places to create value. And although the topic of the talk was creating value, the value here is not often monetary, or it can be monetary, but it's not only monetary. We can create all kinds of value with these hybrid organizations, like the microfinance shows. Okay, that is all for me. Thank you very much.